In the spring of 1945, somewhere in the German countryside, 9 young women made a choice that would change their lives forever. They were prisoners. They were starving. They were hundreds of miles from home, and they were about to do something that seemed impossible. This is not a story about soldiers or generals. This is a story about courage that came from friendship, about hope that survived in the darkest places, about 9 women who refused to give up even when the whole world was falling apart around them. Their names were Hélène, Suzanne, Nicole, Madelon, Guillemette, Renée, Joséphine, Jacqueline, and Yvonne. They came from France, Holland, and Spain. They were mothers, students, and workers, and together.
Before the darkness came, these were ordinary young women living ordinary lives. Hélène was an engineer, a rare thing for a woman in those days. She was smart, spoke 5 languages, and had a mind that could solve any problem. Her friend Suzanne loved books and dreaming about the future. Nicole was strong-willed and brave. Madelon and Guillemette were friends from Holland who traveled to France looking for adventure. Renée was a young mother with a baby girl she loved more than life itself. Joséphine had the most beautiful singing voice. Jacqueline had lost so much already, and Yvonne knew how to survive on the streets. They were under 30 years old. They had their whole lives ahead of them. They wanted the same things we all want: safety, family, a warm meal at the end of the day, and a peaceful tomorrow. But then the war came, and with it, a darkness that covered all of Europe.
When German soldiers marched into France and Holland in 1940, these young women faced a choice. They could stay quiet and try to survive, or they could stand up and fight back, knowing it might cost them everything. One by one, they chose to resist. Not with guns. Most of them had never held a weapon. They fought with courage and cleverness. They carried secret messages hidden in their coat linings. They helped Allied soldiers escape to safety. They organized others who wanted to fight for freedom. Hélène used her engineering skills to help parachute weapons into France. Suzanne worked with youth groups, passing information. Nicole became a leader in the Paris Underground network. The Dutch women Lon and Gigi left their homeland to join the fight in France. They knew the risks. They had seen neighbors arrested and disappear. They heard the rumors about the camps. But they believed some things were worth fighting for: freedom, dignity, the right to live without fear. They were heroes, though they would never call themselves that. The knock on the door always came early in the morning or late at night. For each of the 9 women, the moment of arrest was different, but the fear was the same. The German secret police, the Gestapo, were good at finding people. They had informants everywhere: a neighbor who talked too much, a friend who broke under pressure. Sometimes it was just bad luck, being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Hélène was arrested in northeastern France, Suzanne in Paris. Nicole was caught just days before Paris was liberated, so close to freedom, yet so far. The Dutch women were taken together, and Renée, the young mother, was arrested while she was expecting her baby. They were taken to French prisons first, cold cells with stone walls. Then came the interrogations, the questions, the threats. But these women had made a promise to themselves and to each other, even before they met. They would not break. They would not betray their friends. And they kept that promise.
In 1944, they were loaded onto cattle cars and sent east into Germany. Their destination was a place called Ravensbrück, a concentration camp built only for women 50 miles north of Berlin. When they arrived, everything that made them human was taken away: their clothes, their hair, their names. They were given striped uniforms and numbers. They were treated as if they were nothing. But inside, they were still themselves. And it was here, in this terrible place, that the 9 women found each other. Maybe it was at roll call, standing for hours in the freezing cold. Maybe it was in the crowded barracks at night, trying to sleep on wooden boards. Maybe it was during the long days of forced labor. But somehow they recognized something in each other, a spark, a refusal to give up. They made a decision. They would survive together. They would share their bread, even though they were starving. They would hold each other up, even when they could barely stand. They would be a family. In a place designed to destroy the human spirit, they created something beautiful. They created hope.
From Ravensbrück, the 9 women were sent to work in a munitions factory in the city of Leipzig. 12 hours a day, they made weapons for the German army. Their hands turned yellow from the chemicals. The air was thick with poison. Explosions happened without warning. It was bitter work. They were helping the same army that had destroyed their countries and imprisoned them. But even here they found small ways to resist. A loose screw, a measurement just slightly wrong, little acts of sabotage that might save a life on the battlefield. At night, in their barracks, they did something remarkable. They cooked with words. Lying on their bunks, hungry beyond measure, they would whisper recipes to each other. "Take a dozen eggs," one would say softly. "Separate the whites and beat them until they are like clouds. Add butter," another would continue. "Real butter, as much as you want." They would describe every detail, the smell of roasting chicken, the taste of chocolate cake, the warmth of fresh bread. It kept them human. It reminded them of home, of family dinners, of a life that still waited for them, somewhere beyond the barbed wire. It was their way of saying, "We are still here. We have not forgotten who we are."
By April 1945, everyone knew the war was ending. American soldiers were coming from the west, Soviet soldiers from the east. Germany was collapsing. But for the prisoners, this brought new danger. The Germans decided to move them, to hide the evidence of what they had done. On April 14th at 2 in the morning, 5,000 women were forced out of the camp gates and onto the road. It was called a death march. Those who couldn't keep up.
The column was moving along a country road. On one side was a ditch. Beyond the ditch was a field filled with bright yellow flowers. Rape flowers, they're called. Beautiful and golden in the spring sun. Hélène looked ahead. She looked behind, and she saw something. A gap. Just for a moment, the guards were distracted, looking the other way. She grabbed Suzanne's hand. She signaled to the others. One word. Now. They didn't run. Running would have been noticed. Instead, they slid, quietly, carefully, into the ditch. They lay flat against the wet earth. They pulled grass and yellow flowers over their striped uniforms. They held their breath. Above them, 5,000 women kept marching. Wooden shoes hitting the road, guards shouting orders. The sounds came closer, passed right over them, then slowly, slowly faded into the distance. They waited. They counted to 100, to 1,000. Finally, when everything was quiet, they lifted their heads. They were alone. The column was gone. They were free. But now the real journey was about to begin.
9 women, alone in enemy territory. They wore prison stripes. Their heads were shaved. They had no food, no money, no weapons. And they were hundreds of miles from safety. The American army was somewhere to the west. That became their North Star. Go west. Find the Americans. Get home. They traveled mostly at night, hiding during the day. They slept in barns, burrowing into hay for warmth. They stole potatoes from fields, not because they were thieves, but because they were starving. They found a copper pot and carried it with them, even though it was heavy. In that pot, they could boil the potatoes they found. It became sacred to them, a symbol of home, of sitting around a table together. Every day brought new dangers. German soldiers were everywhere, retreating but still dangerous. There were men who might hurt them. There were villagers who might turn them in. But the 9 women had something powerful, each other. When Jacqueline got sick with diphtheria, they didn't leave her behind. They carried her. When Helene's old hip injury flared up and every step was pain, the others supported her. When fear threatened to overwhelm them, they held hands and kept moving. They were like a chain, 9 links, each one making the others stronger.
Moments of humanity amid darkness. Not everyone they met wanted to harm them. This is important to remember. One night, hiding in a barn, they were discovered by a German soldier. The women froze in terror. They knew what could happen. But this soldier, tired, perhaps thinking of his own family, simply looked at them and walked away. In a small village, Hélène and Madelon, who spoke perfect German, talked their way into getting shelter. They told a story about being displaced workers. Some people believed them. Some people, seeing how thin and desperate they were, gave them bread and soup without asking questions. In the middle of war, in the heart of enemy territory, they found moments of mercy. These small acts of kindness kept their faith in humanity alive. Not everyone was cruel. Not everyone was an enemy. Sometimes, in the darkest times, a stranger's kindness can save your life. And sometimes, it can save your soul.
Personal story with universal meaning. Through everything, the camp, the factory, the march, the escape, Renée carried a secret. Sewn into the hem of her ragged dress was a tiny photograph. It was a picture of her baby daughter, France. When Renée was arrested, France was only 18 days old. The baby was taken to a prison nursery. Renée didn't know if her daughter was alive or dead, but she had this one small photo, and she protected it with her life. Every night, when the others were asleep, Renée would touch the hem of her dress where the photo was hidden. She would close her eyes and imagine holding her baby again, feeling her weight in her arms, kissing her forehead. That photo was more than paper and ink. It was hope. It was a promise. It was the reason Renée kept walking when her feet were bleeding, the reason she kept living when dying would have been easier. Sometimes, love is the strongest force in the world, stronger than fear, stronger than cruelty, stronger than war itself. Renée was going home to her daughter, and nothing in this world was going to stop her.
After 10 days of walking, hiding, and stealing food to survive, the 9 women reached a river. It was called the Mulde River, and it marked the line between the German army and the American forces. This was the moment everything had been leading to. On the other side of that river was freedom, real freedom. But how would they cross? The bridges were destroyed. The water was cold and fast. They were weak from hunger and exhaustion. They searched along the bank until they found a damaged structure, some boards, some rope. It wasn't safe, but it was their chance. One by one, helping each other, they made their way across. When the last woman reached the western bank, they collapsed on the ground. They had made it. They were out of Germany. They were safe. For the first time in years, they allowed themselves to cry. Not tears of sadness, tears of relief, of gratitude, of joy. They had walked through the valley of death, and they had come out the other side.
The next day, they saw a vehicle approaching. Not a German truck, an American Jeep. The soldiers looked at these 9 ragged women with shaved heads and hollow eyes. They didn't see criminals or enemies. They saw survivors. One soldier reached into his pocket and pulled out a pack of cigarettes. He smiled and said 3 simple words. "Have a smoke?" It was such an ordinary gesture, the kind of thing people do every day without thinking about it. But to the 9 women, it meant everything. It meant they were human again. It meant they were safe. It meant the nightmare was over. They were no longer prisoners. They were no longer numbers. They were women who could be offered a cigarette, who could smile, who could look forward to tomorrow. That moment, so small, so simple, was the moment they truly became free. The American soldiers took care of them. They gave them food, slowly, carefully, because their stomachs couldn't handle much after years of starvation. They gave them clean clothes. They gave them medicine. Then came the journey back to France. It took weeks. The roads were clogged with refugees, soldiers, and the wreckage of war. Europe was a broken place, trying to put itself back together. When they finally reached Paris, they went to a grand hotel called the Lutetia. During the war, it had been used by the German army. Now it was where survivors came home. The lobby was full of people holding photographs, calling out names, searching desperately for their loved ones. Some reunions were joyful. Many ended in heartbreak. For the 9 women, it was overwhelming. They had survived. They were home. But they carried the weight of all they had seen, all they had lost, all the friends who hadn't made it. Coming home wasn't the end of their journey. In many ways, it was just the beginning.
Renée Le Bon began searching the moment she arrived in Paris. She went to orphanages. She talked to nurses. She showed people the tiny photograph from the hem of her dress. And then, one day, she found her, little France, the baby she had held for only 18 days. The daughter she had carried in her heart through the darkest places on earth. The little girl was 3 years old now. She didn't know her mother, but Renée knew her. She would have known her anywhere. They say that when Renée held France in her arms again, she didn't speak. She just held her and cried. All the tears she had held back in the camp, on the march, during the escape, they all came out now. It was the most beautiful kind of crying, the kind that comes when a prayer is finally answered, when a miracle happens, when love proves stronger than everything that tried to destroy it. Mother and daughter were together again, and nothing would ever separate them again. This is why they survived. This is why they kept walking. For moments like this.
After the war ended, the 9 women tried to return to normal life. They got jobs, they married, they had children, but they didn't talk about what had happened to them. It wasn't that they wanted to forget. How could anyone forget? But the world wanted to celebrate victory, not hear about suffering. People wanted to look forward, not backward. Hélène went back to work as an engineer. She married and raised a family, but she never told her children about the escape, about the 9 women, about the yellow flowers in the ditch.
Suzanne wrote down their story in a manuscript, but publishers weren't interested, so she put it in a drawer, where it stayed for 50 years. The others did the same. They kept quiet. They carried their memories alone. This is something we should understand about that generation. They survived terrible things. They did extraordinary things, but they didn't expect medals or recognition. They just wanted to live in peace. They were humble heroes, and their silence was a gift to their families. They didn't want to burden them with the darkness they had seen. But silence has a cost, too, and eventually, the story needed to be told.
As we come to the end of this story, think about what these women teach us. They teach us that when everything is taken from you, your freedom, your home, even your name, no one can take away who you are inside, your courage, your love, your humanity. They teach us that the smallest acts of kindness matter. A piece of bread shared, a hand held, a friend carried when she cannot walk. They teach us that hope is not foolish, even in the darkest times. Renee held on to that photograph in her hem because she believed she would see her daughter again, and she did. They teach us that we are never truly alone if we have each other. These 9 women walked through hell together, and they came out the other side not broken, but stronger, not bitter, but grateful, not silent forever, but finally able to tell their story so that we can learn from it. When you face your own difficulties, and we all do, remember the 9 women. Remember the yellow flowers in the ditch. Remember the copper pot. Remember the photograph in the hem. And remember that courage is not the absence of fear. It is taking one more step even when you're afraid. It is holding on to hope even when everything seems hopeless. It is loving even when the world is full of hate. Their story is not just history. It is a light that still shines today, showing us the way home.
And now, their story lives on in us, in everyone who hears it and remembers that courage, hope, and kindness are the things that truly matter. Thank you for listening. Thank you for remembering. And if this story meant something to you, please share it with others. These 9 women deserve to be remembered. Their courage deserves to be honored. Until next time, take care of each other, hold on to hope, and never forget that even in the darkest times, the human spirit can shine through.